Hello and welcome to today's webinar hosted by SAI Global. My name's Tracy Miller. I'm the Marketing Manager for EMEA and I'll be moderating the webinar. Today's session is titled 5 Steps to Build a Powerful Risk and Control Strategy. And for those of you who are familiar with SAI Global, you probably know us for our risk management and GRC solutions. And in this session, we've partnered with Michael Rasmussen to take a deeper look into risk management and the internal control function. We will explore how to embed this function throughout an organisation to not only incorporate financial IT controls, but to build a more powerful strategy incorporating enterprise and operational risks. You're in great hands today. Our presenter, Michael Rasmussen, is an internationally recognised GRC pundit covering topics like governance, risk management and compliance, with specific expertise on GRC strategy and technology architectures. He has over 23 years of experience helping organisations improve GRC process and helping them to design and implement GRC architectures and choose solutions that are effective, efficient and agile. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, author and advisor, and is often known as the father of GRC after he was the first to define and model the GRC market back in 2002 during his time at Forrester Research. So he's got a wealth of experience to share with you today. And joining Michael is Kathleen Oliveira, Senior Solutions Engineer at SAI Global, specialising in integrated risk management. Kathleen has a decade of hands-on experience helping organisations with their evolving risk and compliance challenges. She is passionate about creating flexible solutions for GRC using cutting-edge technology. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Michael and Kathleen to start the session.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today and to talk about, really how do we build a powerful risk and control strategy. My objective is to set some background thoughts in the beginning of this presentation and then get into the 5 steps to build a powerful risk and control strategy that gets down to the specific advice and guidance. But to start with, organizations today are navigating chaos. Today's business is dynamic, disrupted, complex, distributed. It is chaos, literally. Everything's changing minute by minute, second by second. Risks are changing, the geopolitical environment's changing, the economic environment's changing, regulations are changing. Global financial services firms have to deal with 220 regulatory change events every business day coming from over 980 regulators around the world. That could be a new law or regulation, a change law or regulation, an enforcement action, but the business is changing. Employees are changing, processes are changing, business environments themselves are changing, third-party relationships are changing, technology is changing. The challenge for organizations today in building a powerful risk and control strategy is that we have to navigate all this chaos of change. We're not dealing with traditional brick and mortar business where things are pretty much static and employees enter an organization and spend their entire career at the same organization. Today's modern organization, again, as I stated, is distributed and dynamic. It's changing constantly, and we have to keep up with that change. And we have to be able to see the big picture and relationships of risks and controls throughout this. In today's environment, you have to understand a complex intersection of risks and controls. I often use the Titanic example as an analogy to illustrate this. The Titanic, Captain E.J. Smith stated, "Never in all history have we harnessed such formidable technology. Every scientific advancement known to man has been incorporated into its design. The operational controls are sound and foolproof." Yet the Titanic sank on its maiden voyage. But you had overconfidence in the ship's design. How often are we overconfident in our business? But it wasn't just with the CEO of the Titanic, the captain, E.J. Smith, but it was what the public thought of the Titanic. The front page of the newspaper said the Titanic was unsinkable. Again, it sank on its maiden voyage. So you had overconfidence in the ship's design. With that, you had to push to get across the Atlantic quickly to show its speed and power of the day. Are we pushing the business too fast for the environments and risks in the environment? Think about it. There's external environmental factors bearing down on the Titanic. It happens in 1912. There's already some form of climate change happening, and the northern Arctic ice shelf is breaking up, and icebergs are coming further south into the Atlantic. And it just also so happens that in January, February, March 1912, the tidal moon poles were of a stronger nature, bringing those icebergs further into the shipping lanes, creating more hazards, more risks than were normally there. And so you have external environmental factors. Same thing with your business. Your business has a lot of external regulatory and external risk factors to take in. And in fact, environmental risk is one of those. You look at the Davos report in the World Economic Forum on risks, the top risks we're facing around the world are climate change and environmental risks. But we have external risks bearing down on our organization. There was health and safety risks with the Titanic. There wasn't the proper number of life preservers and lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. There was design flaws in the Titanic. They tell us that the size of the propeller and rudder were undersized for the massive size of the ship. There was third-party issues with the Titanic. Today's organization is complex. We're not dealing with just brick and mortar business anymore, but today's business is a complex web of relationships and nested relationships and supply chains and subcontracting relationships. And I was just talking to a large global automobile manufacturer 2 months ago, and they were telling me that they're struggling with their enterprise risk management program because what traditionally was an internal risk to the organization now transcends across a range of third-party relationships. Half the organization cannot be defined by traditional employees. Half the organization is outsourcers and service providers and vendors and suppliers and contractors and temporary workers and brokers and agents and intermediaries and dealers and you name it. Today's organization is shades of gray, not black and white, of where the organization starts and stops, and that contributes to navigating chaos. In the case of the Titanic had third-party issues as well. There was quality issues in the iron ore that held the rivets of the ship together. We're talking about the rivets, that bolt the seams of the ship together. The iron ore was of a brittle and inferior quality. Not only that, there's oversight functions. We talk about things like the 3 lines of defense. The first line of defense being operational management in the front lines of the organization. The third line being the audit and assurance functions. The second line being, what most of us on the phone and on the web today are dealing with, the risk and compliance officers and managers and security and internal control professionals. And so the Titanic had that second line of defense. But the Titanic was getting warnings of icebergs in the area, telegraphs from other ships. And one of the telegraphs says, warnings, icebergs in the area. And the response back from the Titanic was, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Can you imagine that? GDPR, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. California CCPA, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Now coronavirus, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. The ignorance, sticking our head in the sand like an ostrich. The Titanic had high-tech technology to scan the ocean for hazards like icebergs. Back in 1912, that technology was called binoculars. But the crew member that had the key to the cabinet was assigned duty to another ship right before it set sail and took the keys to the cabinet with them. They didn't have access to the technology. How often are organizations leveraging technology like our host today, SAI Global, but they're only just using it for a fraction of what it could be used for, instead of being able to see the expansive and interrelationships of risk and controls that we're talking about today. Lastly, the Titanic was headed towards an iceberg. If it would have hit it dead on, only 2 compartments would have flooded. It was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. When it decided to navigate in the waters and brush it and it hit brush it along the side, combined with the weak iron ore and the rivets, 6 compartments flooded and the ship sank, but it sank slowly. But people didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have the right amount of safety equipment, remember. And so they drowned, and massive loss of life, and it was a tragedy. But that is today's business. But today's business is even worse. It is changing faster than the Titanic ever could think of changing. Minute by minute, second by second, risks and controls. But today's business is like the Titanic in the fact that we need to be able to see all these different silos, because each of those areas on the Titanic, each of those little control and risk areas by themselves might not seem as big of a deal. When you look at the aggregate risk exposure, that was significant and led to massive loss of life. And so how do we deal with this? How do we be able to manage these interrelationships? And today's environment even gets even worse with things like the Internet of Things. The microwave in the break room could be the next exposure of significant data. I mean, you go back several years ago, you think about the Target breach. Target had one of the largest breaches in credit card history. Millions of credit card numbers stolen. The doorway into that was the HVAC vendor. The heating and air conditioning vendor had a connection to the Target network for environmental monitoring. A hacker broke into to the heating and air conditioning vendor and was able to compromise point of sale systems across Target. Who would have thought that the heating and air conditioning vendor would have been the doorway into one of the largest credit card breaches? But now, as I was just starting to illustrate, it could be the microwave in the break room that's connected with the Internet of Things. Or worse, it could be the blender at that contractor's office that has your information on their laptop. Yeah, if you think about data breaches, for example, over half the data breaches, come from third parties. And you think about it, that contractor who has your data on their laptop, it could be their blender that is compromised in their home office. That could be a significant data breach for you. That's navigating chaos today. And I'm not kidding. My wife and I went to the Wisconsin State Fair in August, and we upgraded our Vitamix blender. Our Vitamix blender is connected. I can program it with my iPhone for different settings of shakes and things. If that Vitamix blender should have a Trojan horse on it, or have some type of vulnerability exposure, it could be the doorway into compromised data on my laptop with my clients. That's navigating chaos today. And we have to have a risk and control strategy that sees all these complex relationships across silos. I mean, who would have think that the blender or the microwave could be a threat? Who would have thought that the HVAC vendor could have been a threat, for a massive point of sale system breach? But that's navigating chaos today. Now, the physicist Fritjof Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our times, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. Particularly, the physicist was talking about biological ecosystems here. But this applies so well to modern business today. That the more we understand the risks and problems of our organization, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. I get frustrated. This is the whole focal point of my presentation here right now. I'm going to tell you right here. I get frustrated when I come into organizations and they have an enterprise risk management strategy. And they're trying to take a global view of risks across the organization, an enterprise view of risks, but they don't have the same from a control strategy. It doesn't make sense. If we have an enterprise view of risk, we therefore necessitates that we also have an enterprise view of controls. If enterprise risk is a true view of all of enterprise risks, that includes the strategic risk of the organization, the financial treasury risk of the organization, the wide array of operational risks, which could include internal controls over financial reporting, IT security, quality controls, environmental controls, health and safety controls, third-party controls, all these different areas. If we're going to take a broad view of enterprise risk, we need a broad view of enterprise controls. But so often I see these organizations that in lip service, they talk, we have an enterprise risk strategy, but the controls are managed in all these different little silos across departments. IT controls are managed in IT, internal controls or financial reporting are managed in the accounting and controller's office, quality controls are managed in quality, and there's not an enterprise view of controls. If we want an enterprise view of risk, it necessitates that we also have an enterprise view of controls. Leonardo da Vinci stated, realize that everything connects to everything else. We live in this interconnected environment, just like the physicist Fritjof Capra, just like the Titanic example in navigating chaos. We have to see an integrated view of risk and controls. The little things matter. You have something called chaos theory. Chaos theory is where the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands makes tiny atmospheric changes that has this cascading, building, and growing impact that can develop and influence the development and path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Who knows? Hurricane Dorian that devastated the Bahamas a few months back could have started with the flutter of the butterfly's wings in Amsterdam. We have to be able to see, just like the Titanic situation, the risk and control exposures across the organization and how they intersect and can all contribute to a significant risk event in the organization. But the way a lot of organizations are managing risk and compliance and controls is frustrating. It's what I call the inevitability of failure, where we have too many documents and manual approaches and processes. I could think of one organization. When I was interviewing them, they told me that before they took a technology approach to risk and controls, they are spending 200 FTE hours to build a risk report once a year. Think about that. 200 employee hours to build a risk report once a year. And it was taking them 200 hours. That's one employee, about 5 weeks of time work at a 40-hour work week. one employee, to build that report once a year. And it took them so long because risk was being managed in a lot of documents, spreadsheets, and emails scattered across the organization. That's not managing risk, my friends. That's reacting to risk. When it takes you 200 hours to build a report, and all of a sudden you identify that we had this risk exposure that started 11 months ago and is becoming very significant, that's reacting to risk. That is not managing risk. Organizations need complete contextual insight into risk in context of business change as it changes. We need real-time visibility into risk. And documents, spreadsheets, and emails don't get you there in a risk and control strategy. It's the inevitability of failure. It's a false assumption of risk management. It's about risk reaction and not risk management, and control reaction and not control management. And we need to be able to address this in organizations. So the organization needs to be able to see the tree as well as the forest. The individual category of controls and risks, and the interconnectedness of risks. Now, I do a lot of workshops, like my risk management by design workshop and internal control management by design workshop, and the attendees of my workshops love this slide. But I have also been challenged on this slide by two large global banks. In two separate workshops, they said the same thing. They said, this slide is great, but it's not accurate. In our environment, the reality is we need to see the leaf as it connects to the branch, and the branch as it connects to the tree, and the tree as it's part of the forest. That the tree in the forest view isn't enough, that they've got to get down to the details, the flutter of the butterfly's wings in chaos theory. They need to see the leaf and the branch and how that builds and intersects to be eventually part of the forest. We need to be able to see those little things that matter in the organization. So we're in the midst of transition right now, from a past of a lot of manual approaches to risk management and control management to a future of integrated technology for risk management. To be able to move from a past of some risk responsibility to a future of greater risk accountability. Accountability is like your morning breakfast. And accountability versus responsibility is like your morning breakfast. The chicken is interested in your breakfast. The chicken is responsible. It contributed to your breakfast. The pig, representing the bacon, has a different level of accountability in your breakfast, than the chicken does. And so the pig is much more interested in your breakfast than the chicken is. That's accountability. We're seeing a growing focus on a greater accountability, like with the accountability regimes around the world. The UK Senior Managers and Certification Regime, Ireland's Senior Executive Accountability Regime, Australia's BEAR regulation, Banking Executive Accountability Regulation, Hong Kong's Managers in Charge Regulation, Singapore's proposed accountability regulation for 2020. Around the world, we're seeing a greater focus on accountability regulations that puts accountability for risk and compliance exposures. A future where individuals can be held personally accountable. They can be fined or go to jail for negligence, lack of due diligence, or willful misconduct in areas of risk. That's a future of greater accountability for risk and controls in the environment. And so if I'm an executive at one of these organizations that is impacted by these accountability regimes, I'm going to want to make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's correctly. I'm not going to want some, risk and control report that takes 200 hours to build once a year, and all of a sudden tells me that we have some significant exposure, 11 months ago, because I'm accountable. I can be fined. It comes out of my bank account personally. Those executives are going to want dashboards and insights into their risk responsibilities, minute by minute, second by second. That's the future of greater accountability for risk and controls in the organization. Now, when we approach internal control management, and with that risk management, a lot of organizations approach things by specific risk or regulatory issues. And things are often buried, and they're managed in very small silos. I need to address GDPR risk and controls. And then all of a sudden comes along something like California CCPA. Now I need to address California CCPA risk and controls. And then there's other privacy regulations. And at some point, the department says, wow, well, we've got all these little fragmented approaches to a very similar problem. Let's have a broader view of risk and controls at a department level. But now we're seeing this roll up more and more to an enterprise view of risk and controls. But again, one of my frustrations is that so often when I see this, I get frustrated because we might have an enterprise view to risk and seeing a broad definition of risk across the organization, but our view of controls are still stuck down in that risk area or department area. And we don't have a good enterprise view of controls in the environment. My whole premise here that I'm trying to get across to you is that if you have an enterprise view of risk, that necessitates that you also have an enterprise view of controls as well. What do we do when we have a risk? We have 4 options. We can avoid the risk by making a decision where there's no longer a risk, if that could be an option. We can accept the risk as it is. We could transfer the risk, like through through insurance or hedging, or we can mitigate the risk. And that's the one we focus on the most often, is risk mitigation. How do we mitigate risk? We put controls in place to mitigate that risk to an acceptable level. And so if we're gonna have an enterprise view of risk, and then we're gonna have controls to mitigate those risks, it necessitates that we also have a comprehensive enterprise view of controls in the organization. This also requires collaboration, that the organization has the ability to harmonize and synchronize and facilitate collaboration across many different risk and control functions. Where IT controls and risks, and enterprise and operational risks, and like HR risks, and environmental risks, and health and safety risks, and quality risks, and finance and treasury risks, and all these can come into place, and we can all work into a common view of risk and controls. So let me turn this over to Kathleen from SAI Global here to get her perspective.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you everyone for tuning in. So here at SAI Global, organizations typically come to us when they're facing the challenges that Michael just described, right? So they're taking that reactive approach to risk management, they're managing countless spreadsheets, and their GRC program then has become a bit of a beast on its own. They are managing, the data, the metrics, the reporting, and not necessarily the risk. And as Michael mentioned, one of the objectives of a good GRC program is to facilitate that collaboration element, to make that collaboration effortless, and especially avoid being disruptive to the business. So you want to be able to quickly and reliably get the information that you need from your first line of defense, and technology really helps with this. So we're able to see that by implementing a proper GRC solution that's structured in a good way, that's a fit for you, you can engage your organization more effectively. And this challenge of effectively engaging the business, is faced by everyone, right? They want the user experience to be as transparent as possible. The user shouldn't have to look for a user manual every few months when they have to respond to a questionnaire in the GRC tool, right? So intuitive technology with role-based views designed to eliminate distractions, combined with smart learning capabilities such as contextual tutorials, right? The ability for you to stipulate what the user is going to see when they log in, what that risk owner is going to see. Are they going to see an image of your risk matrix when they're logging in there? Or is there going to be, definitions there of your risk descriptions, right? All of that is really important to guide your user and to ensure that your GRC system is actually accepted throughout the organization. So the acceptance of this system by your contributors is a key success factor, and we don't want you to underestimate that. With that, I'll hand that back to Michael. Thanks.
I think you bring up an excellent point there, Kathleen, and particularly in this slide where we talk about the first line of defense. Risk management isn't about the back offices of the chief risk officer and risk managers in the organization. Risk is owned and risk materializes in the front office of the business. So it's really about that first line of defense that we need to be able to communicate and interact with risk. The job of risk management and chief risk officers is to facilitate risk management across the organization and help see these interconnections. But real risk is actually owned by the business out there in the front lines of the organization. I've been interacting with one large insurance firm in the United Kingdom, and they're specifically looking for technology right now to replace what they've been using on this specific matter. They want to be able, to hide the complexities of risk management for the front office, because they still need the complexity of risk management for the back office, the chief risk officer and that person's team. But they want the KISS methodology, the keep it simple, stupid, that can communicate risk and provide that facilitation on risk to the front office of the business. They don't want to overwhelm, but they definitely need to engage on risk management, because risk, the exposure is out there in the business, not in the back, in risk management functions themselves, but in the business. And they need to be able to interact and engage that front lines of the business, the first line of defense on risk. And so that intuitive, engaging user experience becomes critical, as you were just outlining. So organizations need to take an enterprise integrated strategy for risk and control management in their organization. This comes together in their overall strategy document, and that defines, and I've done a lot of work. I was working with one Fortune 100 firm a couple of years ago and building out their enterprise risk management policy that defines that strategy. And what are the roles and groups involved in the risk management strategy? What's the overall reporting functions and cycle of risk reporting? How is that conducted? How do we define risks and centralize a key view of risk and map controls to risks? How are you defining that? That comes out in your charter, and then some type of enterprise risk management policy. And controls should definitely be included there too, that beyond just having a risk register or a common risk repository, that we also have that central control register as well. From there, we define our common risk and control management processes. How do we identify risk? How do we assess risk? How do we measure and treat and analyze risk and monitor risk? How do we define, the risk ownership and what's acceptable and unacceptable risk? Some of that gets defined in the strategy piece, but it gets implemented throughout in the processes. From there, you need the right and common information technology architecture to support an enterprise view of risk and controls in your respective organization. So now we're going to move to the heart of what we're talking about here. What I define as 5 steps to build a powerful risk and control strategy. Step number 1 is to establish your current state. You're somewhere now. Risk management is happening in your organization. Control management is happening in your organization in some capacity now. It can be completely reactive firefighting. It can be very mature and integrated. So step number 1 in the 5 steps to build a powerful risk and control strategy is understand what your current state is. How is risk and control management being conducted in your organization? What's working, what's not working, and then project 3 years from now, this is where we want to be. This is how risk and control management's changed. So what's your current state? And from that, define your future state. That it's critical to understand your journey, to plan it out and lay out your route ahead of time. And that starts, so you can't plan a journey without understanding where you're starting from. So what is your current state, where you're at now, and understanding what's working, what's not working, and where do you want to be, and what are the steps to get you there? The second stage is to get the right people involved. Who needs to be on the team? And how do we get them to be part of the team? And what are the different roles and responsibilities? Are there certain individuals that just are very hard to work with, or departments, and they don't want to share data and they don't want to work with us? My suggestion, if possible, is to work around them. An enterprise view of risk and controls, there's a lot to tackle. So if you got certain departments or groups that are just going to hold you back and cause frustration, come back to them in a year after you've tackled the other aspects that are willing to work with you. That's my suggestion. I can think of, but sometimes it just gets down to good communication and clarifying what you're trying to do. I can think of when I came into a large insurance company, and seated around the board, it was just for a strategy day. I'm planning enterprise GRC, enterprise risk management. And in the room, there was risk management, corporate compliance, legal, IT, and audit. And everybody was so on board for this enterprise view of risk and controls, what they're calling GRC. Everybody's on board except for audit. Audit was like sitting back and saying, you guys do what you want. We're audit. We're independent. You guys can implement your technology and processes. We have to be independent from this and not involved because we're audit. That's how audit started the day. By the end of the day, audit went from being the antagonist to the protagonist. Audit was saying, wow, if we had this type of visibility into risk and control information in the organization, it would streamline our audits, and we can connect this information into our audit plans and work papers, and things be more efficient, and we could actually be getting more done, and because we're so far behind. Audit in one day went from being the against the strategy, or just actually not wanting to participate in the strategy, I should say, they weren't against it, to being the biggest advocate and driver of the strategy. But part of getting the right team and responsibilities is defined as laying out that clear vision and what you're trying to achieve and the value you expect from that. The third thing to do is select the right technology. You just don't throw everything into a bag. You carefully select your equipment for the task at hand. You don't want to start trekking up a mountain, climbing, and find out that you only have enough rope to get you halfway up the mountain. You need the technology that's going to get you through. I mean, in step one, we talked about understanding where our current state is, and from there, understanding what our desired state is, that future state. You want to select the technology that's going to get you to that future state. And you need technology that has, a manageable cost of ownership, that is highly configurable without breaking by customizing and coding things so much. You need highly configurable, adaptable solutions that have a great cost of ownership for your organization, and that has the depth of capabilities you need to fulfill your vision of that future state. I see a lot of these projects fail, not because they have the wrong strategy or processes, but because they select the wrong technology. And the technology has a high cost of ownership. There's a lot of configuration build out. I can think of like a LinkedIn post from a year ago, that described, one of Gartner's favorite leaders in the upper right. But they described their implementation to the lyrics of the song Hotel California. That, which basically, if you know those lyrics, you're stuck and can't get out. That after $500,000 in software licensing and $2 million on implementation and customization costs, 3 years later, they're getting some basic functionality working. That's not agile technology. Right there is a broken project. You need technology that is agile for your environment, that can be leveraged by the business, and as Kathleen just sharing, that is good for the front lines of the first line of defense, the front lines of the organization, as well as the back office of risk and compliance, the second and third lines of defense, and that can have the capabilities to deliver on what your vision is. Select the right technology. From there, it's also important to understand your route. You climb Mount Everest too fast, what happens? You die. The same thing with a big enterprise risk and control strategy. You try to do too much too quickly and the project fails. You need to break your project down into steps. With climbing Mount Everest, you climb to the first base camp and you let your body acclimate to the altitude. And then you take on the next trek to get to the second level. And then you let your body again acclimate to that level. And then the third, and finally you reach the top. The same thing with an enterprise risk and control strategy. What are you trying to accomplish in the first 3 months, the second 3 months, the 6 months after that? Break it down into stages that are manageable. Enterprise risk and control is very complex. There's a lot of areas of risk and controls. And if you try to take it all on right away, you're going to overwhelm the organization and yourself and your team, and things are going to fail. Define your project plan and break it down into manageable steps. Kathleen, what are your thoughts there?
Yes, I definitely agree here, Michael. I think that's really critical what you raised in terms of, choosing the right software, yes, but also focusing on creating success, right? And so here at SAI Global, one of the things that we recommend is to start small. So start with one use case, right? Get that streamlined, get that up and running, and then build from there. So there are a few ways to do this. One of the ways is to start with your most critical areas, those that already have some clearly defined objectives, for example. Another way of doing it is, as Michael alluded to earlier, some areas of the organization might be easier to work with than others, and they might be good advocates for you and for your program. So Another strategy is to maybe start with the path of least resistance in terms of your internal organization and who's going to be easiest to work with. And lastly, if you're really, starting from scratch even perhaps, or, really wanted to get a good revamp of your program, you could always leverage the proven best practices that are available and those guidelines that we have in industry standards, such as for risk management, the ISO 31000. So it's important to, think about those things, but always focus on creating trust, demonstrating return on investment, and then building from there. Michael?
Excellent points. So in that context, the fifth step to creating a risk and control strategy in your organization is understanding that, and this is what's so exciting about this area, this field, is that it's never over. You might have hit the top of your trek up the risk and control Mount Everest, and then all of a sudden there's a major merger or acquisition, or there's a new regulation or significant shift in risk exposure in the organization. We live in a dynamic business environment where things are changing minute by minute, second by second, and the organization needs to be prepared for that. And so that's what's exciting, is we constantly have to adapt to new things that are coming up as well, and be prepared and ready for that change. That fifth guidance on 5 steps to a powerful risk and control strategy. But as I've stated, technology is critical. Technology provides the automation and tracking for an integrated enterprise risk and control strategy, provides robust management reporting where it doesn't take 200 FTE hours to build a risk and control report. That report's there at a push of a button. It provides a strong audit trail and system of record of accountabilities and workflow and tasks and the collaboration and the enforcement and monitoring of risks in the environment. And it can integrate with other systems. There's no system on this planet that does everything GRC risk and control related. And I often, when I come into these enterprise GRC RFPs, I say, well, you should be focusing on a core platform that can accomplish the main pieces of what you're looking for, but understand there's specialized areas that can plug into this as well. For example, if we're going to look at a true enterprise view of risks, that's going to include financial and treasury risk. There are specialized systems out there for doing credit risk management, market risk management, hedging, commodity risks, things like that. That's a place where we can integrate, where something like the SAI Global BUIs can be the dashboard and view into all these risks, and it could be managing the broad array of operational risks, but can also integrate and be gathering metrics for specialized risk areas like commodity risks and things like that, and integrate with those systems so that still, the SAI Global BUI system could be that master data dashboard on risk, but also leverage integration of the risk information from specialized systems as well. It should also have a strong visibility and global reach and availability in the organization. It should provide a robust information architecture so that we can clearly define what our objectives are, whether they're strategic entity level objectives, department level objectives, process or even asset level objectives. We then can manage risks to those objectives. You look at the definition of ISO 31000. ISO 31000 says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. There's a relationship between risks and objectives. We have to understand the objectives, then we can be able to understand the risks and manage those risks in context of achieving those objectives. Controls are put in place so that we can reliably achieve objectives, but we can also mitigate the risk and exposure to those objectives. Issues and incidents, cases, and investigation is where risk is materialized. And so there's a mapping of risk to issues to be able to populate and understand how this risk is materialized in the past, but they can also hinder the objectives and also show us where controls are failing or missing or are weak. You have things such as control owners, objective owners, risk owners in the organization, subject matter experts on risks. You've got policies. Policies help us reliably achieve objectives. Again, can you imagine an organization without policies? It would be all over the place. Policies are also risk documents. The very fact that we have a policy means somebody's identified a risk, and that risk was significant enough that we had to write down behavior to control that risk in a written document called a policy. Policies govern controls. Your password policy tells you length of password, frequency of change of password, complexity of password. Those are controls in your environment. Your gift and entertainment policy tells you the amount of a gift and the frequency you can give that gift to any individual or entity over a period of time, those are controls that get implemented in your environment. Issues, incidents, cases, and investigations point to violations of policies. Are we hiring bad, wicked, evil people that want to do bad things? Perhaps, but most likely you'll find that, hey, people weren't aware there was a policy here, and we have a communication or training issue, or this policy is ambiguous, we need to clarify the language there. As obligations and regulations change, policies need to be adapted, controls need to be adapted, risks need to be modified, and where things apply to the organization. We need this, what we call 360-degree contextual intelligence on risk and control information that provides these insights of these relationships. So we have higher quality information, we can optimize our risk and control processes, we can better allocate our capital to where our risk exposure is the greatest, improve effectiveness of risk and controls in the environment while protecting the reputation and brand of the organization, while making things more efficient and reducing costs. Now, I talk a lot about the history of GRC, from GRC 1.0 to the future of GRC and GRC 5.0. We are currently at GRC 4.0 right now. And GRC 1.0 was that period of 2002 to 2007, which I call the SOX captivity of GRC, where, I originally defined governance, risk, and compliance very broadly in 2002. Sarbanes-Oxley came out that year and sort of hijacked GRC for 5 years. Then we have GRC 2.0, which was this enterprise GRC view, where we try to look at one platform that brought in the range of enterprise risks, operational risks, and information security and audit functions and things like that. Then we came into GRC 3.0, which I call GRC architecture, which is that period about 2012 to 2017. And that was, there's not one platform that does everything. And so the integration of GRC is critical, being able to see and integrate things into a core view of risk and controls, but also leverage highly specialized systems where necessary too. We're now what I call GRC 4.0, Agile GRC, where technology should be highly usable, not just for the back office of GRC, but usable, as Kathleen was stating a few slides ago, for the front office, the first line of defense. That technology has a manageable cost of ownership, that where it's not taking, 3 years to implement and build out, at a cost of millions and millions of dollars. And I'm not talking about process design, I'm talking about configuration and customization costs need to come down. Agile technology today, agile technologies are ones that are configurable, that they're highly configurable to the organization without coding and customization. And so that they're configurable, scalable, adaptable, easy to integrate, provide a depth of analytics and reporting, and are beginning to look at artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, and upgrades don't break. I was talking to a major bank last month in the United Kingdom, and they're on one of Gartner's leaders in the upper right. They're on versions, well, I'm not going to say the version because I give away the specific vendor. They're on one version of the platform, and they're looking at going to the next version of the platform. And they're now considering going to RFP, because there's so much customization and coding on the version of the platform that they're in now. It's like a whole new implementation of a whole new product and a migration to get to the next version of the same product. That shouldn't be happening. Future proof is where, the system's been configured, not customized, and that upgrades, there might be little issues here and there, but for the most part, upgrades are fairly seamless and aren't the same as like implementing a whole new software. It shouldn't be like that. So if we take a 360-degree contextual awareness of risk and controls in our environment, what I call this agile approach, we should become more aware of how risks and controls intersect and interrelate across departments and the organization, so we can avoid those Titanic situations and be able to navigate chaos. This allows us to align our resources and be able to work together collaboratively in the organization, to be able to identify issues and become more responsive to issues and contain them when they're still small issues, to be agile in a dynamic and changing business environment, and therefore more resilient, and from there, more efficient in our use of resources. All those are critical. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Kathleen to bring us into some final SAI Global perspectives.
Lovely, Michael. Thank you so much. And I absolutely agree with you there. You know, the ability to configure your own tool is absolutely critical. And we have 5 points here that we just wanted to supplement Michael's incredible 5-step strategy with a couple of key elements for your consideration when selecting a GRC tool. So the first and foremost that you need to consider here is, will it allow you to create success quickly and build from there? So will your new GRC tool be engaging for your end users as well? Will the user interface be intuitive enough for them to be able to use it without, you know, extensive need for training as a recurring exercise? Will it keep my data safe is the third item here. So in addition to the role-based access control that GRC systems typically have, Michael alluded to earlier as well, we are also seeing, like we were mentioning before, a very wide variation now in the regulatory landscape, specifically with regard to data privacy. So depending on where you're based geographically, you want to be sure that wherever your GRC tool is hosted, it's in concordance with your regulatory requirements in that region, and it's keeping your data safe as per those privacy requirements. The fourth item on the list here is, will it support changes to your organization over time? So will it be scalable? This really harks back to what Michael was alluding to as well in terms of configurability versus customization, right? You don't want to have to learn how to code in order to make a change to your GRC tool. You want to be able to make changes quickly and on the fly, so that not only if you decide to change some element of your taxonomy, right, something small and minor, but say you want to remodel your framework or you want to make serious foundational changes, that configurability will give you the power to do so. And lastly, will it show what you need to be showing to auditors? So will you be spending those 200 man hours building those reports, or will this GRC tool be allowing you to extract the right data that you need quickly and easily? That's something that's really key to keep in mind, and I think is a good summary of, you know, some key suggestions to consider just to keep in mind as you're going through your 5-step strategy. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll hand it back to our presenter.
Well, thank you, Michael and Kathleen, for sharing those great insights today. It was really useful. And thank you, everyone, for your time today attending. If you'd like more information on SAI Global's GRC solution, or if you'd like to request a demo, do email us at bwise@saiglobal.com. If you could just move to the next slide. Hopefully everyone can see the email address. And then once again, thank you everyone for your time today. We hope you found the session useful.